Three local companies found to have imported tainted oil from Taiwan. Federation of Students to launch a boycott of classes on September 22nd. And the standby signal number 1 is in force.
Good evening. The tainted oil scandal in Taiwan continues to widen. Close to 1,000 restaurants and snack stalls in Taiwan have used a contaminated product. Here in Hong Kong, the Centre for Food Safety said today 3 local companies had imported oil from the company at the centre of the scandal. Tests are being carried out on 46 food and oil samples collected locally. Evelina Leung tells us more.
More products in Taiwan, including meat pastries, dumplings and noodles, have been pulled off the shelves amid the widening tainted oil scandal. Local media have reported that authorities have inspected the company at the center of the scandal many times, but didn't discover any problems. Here in Hong Kong, the Centre for Food Safety released its latest findings on the Taiwan contaminated oil scandal this afternoon.
We have identified 3 importers which have imported lot from this company called Changguan Enterprise. But the lot that this company is imported are different from the one discriminated in Taiwan. So as a precautionary measure, we have marked and sealed the remaining stock, asked them to record the products from their distributors, and ask them to take these products off shelves.
Ho said Taiwanese authorities have released a list of products that were made from the contaminated oil. This list can be found on the website of the Centre for Food Safety. Meanwhile, the centre has identified the company that imported the problematic oil and supplied it to Maxim's. The company said it only supplied the tainted oil to Maxim's. Another company that had imported the tainted oil, Hong, admitted today that starting 1 or 2 years ago, it had been importing oil from Taiwan. The oil was sold to restaurants and bakeries in Hong Kong. A Hong spokesperson said the company didn't realize the product was actually made by Changguan until they went back through the records. The company has stopped selling the item. On the other hand, the Welcome supermarket chain announced it will stop the sale of a noodle product and a satay sauce from Taiwan. The supermarket earlier pulled a dumpling product off the shelves as well. A spokesperson said consumers who have bought these products will be refunded. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam has vowed to fight to the last minute to gain pan-democratic lawmakers' support for the political reform framework announced by Beijing. She's also urged members of the public to express their demand for universal suffrage to lawmakers. Rani Samtani reports.
Now that Beijing has set a framework for the 2017 chief executive election through universal suffrage, the government will be launching a second round of public consultation on the issue. Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam said today support from Legislative Council members is very important for the next phase. She also said she doesn't want the pan-democratic lawmakers to boycott the consultation. Lam said the government will fight to the last minute to gain the support of the pan-democratic legislators. Amendments to the electoral method for selecting the chief executive must be passed by a 2/3 majority of LegCo. So the government needs the backing of at least some of the pan-democratic legislators. Lam also urged the public to gain an in-depth understanding of the National People's Congress Standing Committee's decision on the political reform framework and to actively express their demands to the legislators. Meanwhile, Financial Secretary John Zhang stressed on his weekly blog that groups that have different views about political reform need to take into account the views of others. He said it's not a matter of which side has more supporters or is louder in making noises. Instead, they should focus on forging a consensus. Zhang noted that if we look at the problem from another perspective, we have the opportunity to find a win-win solution. Both Lam and Zhang said they hope the government's reform package will be passed. They pointed out that universal suffrage will be a big step forward compared to the current election committee approach. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
Meanwhile, Democratic Party chairwoman Emily Lau says Beijing's conservative ruling on political reform means it's unlikely there will be much breathing room allowed when all sides negotiate the finer details of the plan. That story from Stephanie Choi.
Lau pointed out the National People's Congress Standing Committee's framework is even more conservative than some of the proposals the pro-establishment camp put forward during the government's 5-month public consultation period.
Nobody in Hong Kong has made such a draconian proposal. So that shows the 5-month period was a waste of time, and Beijing had no intention whatsoever of listening to Hong Kong views, even those from the pro-Beijing camp.
But Vice Chairwoman of the pro-establishment Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong and Executive Councillor Starry Lee said the Pan-Democrats didn't get what they wanted because they failed to recognize the political reality of Hong Kong. Fellow EXCO member Jeffrey Lam admitted that limitations to the NPCSC framework would mean only people with certain political views would qualify as CE candidates.
It may not be a perfect solution, but this is something that will bring us forward.
Meanwhile, local academic Francis Loy talked more about a proposal for selecting candidates for the 2017 CE election. Loy, along with 12 other scholars, have proposed a block voting system which could allow more candidates to run. Also today, several groups took part in an Occupy Central drill in Tuen Mun to prepare for what they called a long-term resistance. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
And the Federation of Students announced today thousands of students from 17 universities and post-secondary schools will boycott classes for a week starting on September 22nd. Meanwhile, student group Scholarism admitted there is difficulty in getting secondary school students to join the boycott. Evelyn Lung with the story.
Dozens of students from 17 universities and post-secondary education institutions are expected to participate in the week-long boycott of classes, which will start on September 22nd. The boycott is being launched to protest against Beijing's political reform framework for Hong Kong. The Federation of Students said Hong Kong people are done with trying to communicate and discuss with the authorities. This boycott campaign is to show the younger generation's fight for genuine democracy. The Federation of Students stressed the students will be boycotting classes, not school. During the campaign, at least 27 talks will be held on the goal of the civil disobedience movement. Meanwhile, a gathering will be held at the Chinese University of Hong Kong on the first day of the week-long campaign. Street-side stalls will also be set up to tell the public about their campaign. Student group Scholarism, which will be organizing a similar boycott of classes, said there are difficulties in organizing the campaign among secondary school students.
I think the most difficult part in organizing a boycott of classes among secondary school students is that many secondary school students will face a lot of pressure in their school or maybe in the family because they are still not 18 years old yet.
Chow stressed this boycott campaign aims at making students realize participation in social movement will decide the future of Hong Kong. Apart from boycotting classes, Scholarism is also calling on students to form focus groups to discuss about political reform and to attend gatherings and talks held by the Federation of Students. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
The Hong Kong Observatory has raised the standby signal number 1, but says it's unlikely it will need to hoist the strong wind signal number 3. At 7 p.m, a tropical depression was about 390 kilometers south-southwest of Hong Kong. It's forecast to move northwest in the direction of Hainan Island and is expected to be closest to the city early tomorrow morning.
As it is still be at a distance from Hong Kong, the chance of issuing the strong wind signal number 3 is not high. The outer rain bands associated with this tropical depression are affecting the coastal areas of Guangdong. And as for the weather forecast for tonight and tomorrow, We expect it's mainly cloudy with a few squally showers and isolated thunderstorms.
Turning overseas now, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will arrive in Sri Lanka later today following a visit to Bangladesh. His tour of South Asia is part of his efforts to assert Tokyo's interests in the region. Abe is the first Japanese Prime Minister to visit Bangladesh in 14 years. He held talks with his Bangladeshi counterpart Sheikh Hasina yesterday. Abe followed up on Japan's commitment to invest almost $6 billion in the region over the next 4 to 5 years. In return, Hasina told Abe that Bangladesh had withdrawn its bid for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council in favour of Japan. Earlier this year, Abe played host to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whose visit to Tokyo yielded a Japanese pledge to invest $34 billion in India. The Japanese pledges of economic cooperation came ahead of President Xi Jinping's visit to India and Sri Lanka later this month. In the Americas, rescue crews searching off Jamaica's coast say they can no longer see debris from a small plane which was carrying a prominent New York couple. The plane crashed on Friday. Jamaican officials say possible wreckage from the single-engine turboprop was sighted on Friday evening by a military aircraft. But a day later, officials said they could no longer find signs of the wreckage. The plane was carrying the prominent U.S. real estate developer Lawrence Glazer and his entrepreneur wife, Jane, both of whom were experienced pilots.
And still ahead in the news tonight. The U.S. carries out airstrikes against ISIS militants in Iraq. MSF says a lockdown in Sierra Leone to contain the spread of Ebola won't work. And stunning upsets at the US Open.